Today we're talking about designing your painting with shape and color. And by that we mean getting away from the idea of copying or getting too caught up in detail and focusing on shape and the color of that shape. Thinking a bit more abstractly, because if we don't think more abstractly, we're going to be honed in too much on rendering and, again, detail. So, and by thinking in terms of color, I mean, of course, the most important thing about color is the value. So value is always the, unsaid thing that's the most important. But the color is going to make kind of the impact of these shapes and how we design them. And talked before about finishing a painting without as much detail. The focus of maybe finishing sometimes is not how much detail you add, but how much you can leave out. And that makes the design stick out. So we want to talk more about using those shapes to design with and then the color of those shapes. So I have several images here, and they're all from Montana. And they all happen to be cloudy days, not necessarily designed but that way. But we won't have large dark and light shapes that you'll have on a sunlit day. We'll have more of the subtle value changes. And also on a cloudy day, you have the differences in value between the planes. So the contrast in value is not between big shadow areas and sunlit areas, but between the shape of this, or the value of this tree, darker value of the tree, and the lighter value of the ground, or the lighter value of the sky and the darker value of the tree. And overall darker value of the water compared to the grass, and so on. So separating those four big planes, sky, vertical planes, slanted planes, and flat planes, that's where your contrast is going to come, because there's no dark shadows and bright sunlight to give you the shape. So looking at this one, and again, I've taken kind of a panoramic view as opposed to zooming in, but my focal point, center of interest, includes some of the waters, probably somewhere around in there. Not an object, but more of an area. So what I want to do is zoom in. First of all, decide where I want to, where I want to crop and zoom in. And of course, if you have Photoshop or some kind of internet tool to do that with, it's always an easier way to do it. But probably the best way to do it, again, is with pencil and paper, and do as many of them as you have to come up with a composition that works better. This is more square, and I could probably even come in a bit more. So let's crop this a little bit more. And I usually do 3 or 4 thumbnail drawings, real quick, maybe 10 minutes each, just trying to figure out the best composition. Then I want to take the shapes that I'm separating by the planes and really pushing the color differences. Now the value is what matters in those color differences, because I can make them any color I want, which you'll see in a minute. I'm going to push the color a lot differently than the photograph. And I'm also going to push the contrast between dark and light a lot more. But here the changes more geared towards simplifying the shapes and pushing the colors in certain directions. So added a house over here to the left. In the photograph, the house is right in there, but just moving it over, pulling together these upright trees. And they're always established, most of all, by these darks, because the trees are vertical planes. So I'm going to establish them as darks, then add the lighter on top. And here the lights follow the form more. And that designs the tree. So what I haven't done here is copy that. I've made it a painting, my idea of what I see, based on good use of composition, value, and color. And this helps in terms of thinking. I've got 2 values, maybe 3, but basically 2 values in the water, a light and a dark, muted violet. And then the shadow in the water of the reflection of the trees, the dark of the trees. But trees, 2 values, Smaller trees back in here, 2 values. The grass, 2 or 3 values, all fairly light, but then some subtle color change. But I'm also wanting to push the idea of color variation. Like within the grass, I have more of an orange, yellow-orange back in here, yellow-green, and then a darker, slightly more muted yellow-green with orange and red in it. So varying the color as well as simplifying the values quite a bit. But interpret what you see in terms of shape. Don't copy the photograph. You can see my shapes in the trees are a little soft in the photograph. They're not real solid looking. I made them fairly solid to make them stand out a bit more. Now this is also in Montana. Again, cloudy day. There's a lot of nice variation of color in here, and there's some nice depth back in here. I want to create a bit more depth by getting maybe a couple of more variations of background hills and mountains, just for, again, more sense of depth instead of just sky going all the way down to the horizon. But I want to simplify all this. It's too cluttered. So again, pulling the shapes together, I see as far as the trees go and the shrubbery, I have one shape here, another shape here, here, and then here. So I've got about 5 shapes there that I want to organize, simplify, and come up with a color to make them stand out. Now, this is, I pushed the background here a lot simpler, just 2 values, a darker, real muted blue with kind of a grayer muted green up here. But using a lot of the red violets, red oranges, different values of each to show the color. And the brush stroke here will help how I apply it, again, following the form of that shrubbery. And although after painting it, it still looks fairly busy, it's not as busy as that. I've created a bit more order with the shape and the color of some of those shapes standing out to kind of make it easier to read as I paint it. And lastly, how to take this and create some interest in it and design shapes, again, with colors that are going to make it pop a bit more. Colors are a little bit dead in it. Might be more just the old camera. It's an old digital camera that just weren't that good. But I want a bit more punch to it. I'm not going to make it sunlit. It's going to stay a cloudy day, but the colors are going to have more impact. Not quite as gray. And of course, I'm going to crop it first. My focal point is probably right in here. Some of the water in the tree here or the trees here. So I want to get rid of a lot of what's unnecessary. I want some sky in there and water. But I'm going to have a bit more water than sky, and that's that balance. So crop this, make it bigger. And now I have some nice shapes back in here. I can always, which I don't think I did when I made changes, I can always increase like the shapes of these hills back in here. Increase that, which would increase some of the trees in there. And I want to push the color in the trees. Not enough contrast. This works real well. Everything in here, I think, is set up pretty good to paint. But everything else I need to simplify. I need to separate. So go into my changes here. I didn't lift the mountain up. I could lift this up more, get more variation in the hill back in there. But I popped the color a little bit. This color that is kind of yellow-orange stands out because I cooled down the hills back in here. Photograph the background trees here and the foreground tree here are trees. You don't see much difference between the background and these trees. They don't stand out enough. So by pushing the background trees cooler, I've bluer and cooler, and then the trees up front a lot warmer, a little bit stronger in color, they're going to jump out. These colors here that I've added, I can put those in as long as I don't have them as strong as the trees in front. They need to pop out more. We really want to work on making things come forward and go backwards. Then simplifying and really lightening this back, the flat plane in here. Really makes that flat plane lay down and really look horizontal instead of vertical. I want to keep this flat and light so it looks horizontal. The darker I go with the trees, the more they're going to stand up. And the lighter flat grass is going to lay down. But don't hesitate to really push that distance a lot bluer. I will, most of the time, will go too blue, and then I have to kind of pull it forward just a little bit, which is a good way to go. Get it back there first, and then kind of adjust it to make it fit. So really trying to make these things pop out. So pushing the color and the values, and simplifying those shapes into a big design that makes it easier to see.